Welcome to the StockMiner.com studios. I'm your StockMiner, Brian Johnson. And move up today, only to be met by a move down right at the end of the day. Seemed to be some relatively hard selling coming in about the last, let's see, half an hour or so, of the day. But can the Bears make it stick? You see a lot of this on the way up. And we saw a lot of this previously in that what was it, the May or so run up that we had. We would see a slow grind up by the bulls, and then this really fast accelerated move to the downside for whatever, 5 points or 10 points or whatever it might be in the SPX. And then no follow through. And the bulls would actually end up buying it right back up the very next day. And that's usually how that little game was played. They drop it really, really fast, trying to get everybody all, oh, this is it, this is it. And then no follow through. So we're going to wait, and we're going to look for follow through. Yes, that's right. All right. Here is the action of the day on the 60-minute chart. This is a little bit, stock charts is having an issue right here. So it was pretty much sideways, little drop at the end. But the overall really kind of tempo that you see of the stock is very, very slow on the way up. We did have a gap up, and now we've moved sideways ever since we got up and over that 10,500 mark, which was one of the areas I talked about on a hold. But you can see where we closed. I mean, literally, let's see, we came back down, we tagged 10,500, and then, by the close, we were only at 10,526. So we really haven't moved anywhere in the last couple days. Once again, coiling up for another move. Where? Don't know. Have to remain neutral to bullish on the move, even though we are at some very, very strong overhead resistance up here. The Dow a little bit lagging from the respect that a lot of the other stocks are already up, like the Nasdaq's above this point in its chart. The SPX up to it. Now the Dow is kind of lagging behind it. So, taking its time certainly on this move to the upside, and the bulls in no hurry to push this thing up, showing me that it's very, very tired up here. I'm going to reiterate what I've been saying to you all along, and that is I told you that any move above 10,500 was, sure, play to the upside, but you had to be careful. Just be very cautious about taking any profits. Keep your position sizes smaller, and don't be afraid. I wouldn't be holding long overnight. I don't know. I'm still a little. I still think there's a little bit more risk to the upside at this point than there is to the downside. So just be really, really cautious on any long plays that you're taking. Once again, not saying don't go long, just saying be cautious if you're going to try to go long. Nasdaq on a 60 here was up almost 7 points. Had that little bit of a drop right at the end of the day. Got up right near that 1940-ish mark before we came back down to 1928 for the day. If we go right to a daily, we can really see the bigger picture here. And that is, look at how we're up and over this 1920-ish mark, which was what I had marked on our charts for overhead resistance. We are above it. We are holding above it. We got as high as, I think, 1938. Yep, 1938 today. Couldn't hold it, dropped 10 points by the end of the day, but we are above that 1920 mark, still looking good for the bulls if they can hold it. We'll be watching very closely coming into tomorrow whether or not this tempo can actually keep up for the bulls side. Here on a weekly, you can also see that, it's Tuesday, but we are starting to creep ever so slightly just above that overhead resistance. That would be a big, big area for the bulls to get up and over and hold. The SPX up to that overhead area of 1130. Talked about this. Talked about 1115, 1120, 1125, 1130. That's about what we've seen on the way up as it creeps its way upwards. Really watching this blue line. That'll be the one to watch. Things might tend to slow down a little bit for the markets if they start breaking these blue lines on these 60-minute charts I have as marked. Here's a nice little tag of that overhead 1130. Now, is this left shoulder, head, right shoulder? Yeah, sure, why not? I don't know. Just something to watch. I mean, it's certainly something valid. It certainly is something that is worth your time to at least have marked on your charts. I don't get too wrapped up in a lot of this stuff. But for those of you that may like these type of formations, there you go. Maybe a left shoulder ahead and a right shoulder, you bet. I will recognize that is a possibility. And if so, we could see a very, very big push up if it turns out to be valid. That push up could put us into the 1220-ish mark before it's all said and done with. Little early to be calling that kind of stuff, though, but certainly a scenario that you can at least be thinking about moving forward. From a weekly, not going to really, I mean, we're right at that overhead resistance. You notice the NASDAQ is just barely above it. The SPX is not quite there yet, but awful darn close. Pushing that overhead resistance, you can also see on a weekly the left shoulder head and right shoulder forming a lot more clean on a weekly timetable. But up over 1130, 1135 is probably where I'd start to get a little bit more, bullish in that type of a scenario. Looking at possibly then the 200, right at the 1200 mark. That would make very, very good sense if there's a hard push up from there. VIX on a daily also was, now look at this, it was down for a while, and then right towards the end of the day, as we saw that drop, the VIX started to spike just a little bit. Not really a spike, but it did start to move back up, and you can see where even though the VIX kind of ended up ever so slightly for the day, which confirms what we saw in the markets, which was an ever so slightly move down by the market. So everything's confirming itself right in through here. We can see as the markets move down, the fear does come back into the markets, and for good reason. We're at a very I'll say precipitous point here within the markets, right at strong overhead resistance on the SPX. And so of course there's going to be a little bit more fear in and around this area. I think if we break that 1130 area and start to head upwards, we will see the VIX come back down and to at least retest this bluish line I have drawn in here. I think that's very possible. Fear will probably really subside. That's the point. The point is that I think the fear will really, really subside in the markets once that starts to happen. VIX on a weekly just floundering around down here. No big moves as of yet. Apple on a 60 was up a buck, but you can see where it's just kind of just slowly drifting upwards at this point, waiting for that pullback. Here's the big move from 235 up to 268 now today. Oh, man, when Apple decides to really get going, boy, it's like it just, there's no stopping it. This thing is an absolute Mack truck when it decides to start moving. So we're watching this overhead level, and we're actually watching that from yesterday. Once we broke that, and that was around, what did I say, 264, 265-ish level. Maybe it was 266. I'd have to look again. I can't see the number in there. Sorry about that. But once we broke that level I mentioned in yesterday's video, it was off to the races. It was good for, I would say, I think it was 266, so let's call it a couple bucks, whatever. It was good for profits. How about that? And you can see us starting to creep back up where? Yeah, right into this overhead resistance area again. So which one's going to give? I don't know, but wait for that break. 280, over 280, below 240, still my areas to be watching on a weekly. FAS, drew in a little line for you here. Watch this one closely. Things could tend to slow down ever so slightly if we get a break below that blue line in FAS. From a daily perspective, that would put us also somewhere down here below about that $22 mark. Be looking for maybe a pullback at that point. It could come straight back into the 50, which would be a good dollar move if and when it does get below, and I'd have to figure out exactly where this line is. I'm going to go ahead and say that this line is probably closer to 2175. Yeah, I keep forgetting about this little doohickey I can do here. All right, there we go. Yeah, that's it. 2180. That's right. I remember that level now. We've talked about that about a billion times. So right around 2180, 2175, you can get back below that area, somewhere down in there. You may be able to see this back to the $21 mark. Not a bad trade in FAS at that point. Just got to be very careful right in through here. There is no strength either way. The bulls aren't taking it. The bears aren't taking it. Just like the markets. Same scenario. Here we're looking at a push maybe up. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive on this, you might want to try to get in and sneak a little trade above that 20-period moving average. That'd be above 1320-ish or so, which is another 10-15 cents above us. Might not be a bad little scalp play here if you want to take it up into the 1335, 1340-ish area. Otherwise, bigger moves probably happen after about 1375 or even as high as above $14 before it really starts to get moving again. From a daily, you can see that reflected here too. Look straight down, guys. What does that mean? Stop bottom feeding. Wait for a more definite break one way or the other before you really start pouring money into it. I highly, highly, highly recommend you still remain with a day trade on FAS and FAZ. Be very careful holding overnight. These things move so quickly. One piece of good news, one piece of bad news can absolutely destroy you quickly. So be very careful of that. And that'll do it for today's video. Really not a whole lot to talk about, in all honesty. We saw it just kind of drag around most of the day, and then an attempted quick move to the downside as soon as the markets, about a half an hour before or 15 minutes before the markets closed, could be just a head fake. Just trying to get the bears interested and get them to pour in here before the end of the day. And we'll see if that actually holds any type of staying power coming into tomorrow's trading. Okay, I'll be back with you again tomorrow night as always. See you then. Bye.